Hi everybody, welcome to the Girls Inclusivity in Education Roundtable. I'm delighted to be here. My name's Leonora Dowley and I have spent a lot of my career working in girls' education. But it's not about me today. I've been invited to chair this incredible roundtable. As a bit of an introduction, as we know, as we've just heard, in many areas around the world, of course, girls do not have equal access to education, and they are deprivileged in comparison with boys. We've heard that multiple factors contribute to this, including early marriage, stereotypes for women's future roles, division of household labour, safety at school and on the way to and from it, and stigma around menstruation, among other things. So girls receive an education, but aside from this, girls who receive an education are less likely to marry young and more likely to lead healthy and productive lives. They're likely to earn higher incomes, participate in the decisions that most affect them, and also build better futures for themselves and their families. And girls' education strengthens economies and reduces inequality, contributes to more stable, resilient societies that gives all individuals, including boys and men, the opportunity to fulfill their potential. However, more importantly than this, education is a right. Full stop. So we're going to talk about this today, and I'm really pleased to be joined by 4 people who have first-hand experience of parts of this problem and have also engaged in various initiatives to help girls' inclusivity. 2 of them are Global Student Prize finalists and 2 are Global Teacher Prize winners. So thank you very much for joining us. We have Lamia Butt from the UAE, who has worked with the government of Pakistan to propose legislation and procedures to ensure minority girls get access to education. We've got Ranjit Singh Desale from India, who has managed to improve girls' attendance at school in his region from 2% to 100% through his initiatives, also impacting teenage marriage rates. We've got Oluwandamilola Akintewe from Nigeria, who has years of creating and implementing social impact projects in rural communities and started an initiative called Rebirth, which provides economic empowerment to parents. And we have Maggie McDonald from Canada, who has worked with Inuit youth for the last decade and has first-hand experience of co-creating with students and the community, and created an alternative life skills program for girls who had dropped out of school, allowing them to go from being on the sidelines of the community to agents of change. So one of the first questions I would like to ask our roundtable participants, and I'm going to start with Ranjit Singh, is about mindsets. How do you change mindsets around girls' education?
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm incredibly honored to join this panel of incredible people, especially girls. You're talking about how I changed the parents' mindset working in a rural area. It's very difficult. Let me tell you the fact. In 2009, when I went in my school was sandwiched between cow shed and storeroom. And the girls were not attending schools. Who would like to join such a schools? There I found out very shocking fact was like parents were not, believing in education. That was the root of the problem. So what my personal inception was that the change should not be forced on them. It should be accepted. So I work more on acceptance principle. What exactly I did? Instead of telling them the importance of education, if you do this is going to happen, something like this, instead of doing that, I started engaging with them and invited girls from nearby villages, those who were educated, those who have got the jobs, doing well in the society, in their work. So the girls were coming to my schools, meeting the parents and telling them, hey, look at me. This is how my life changed just because of educations. And at the end of every session, I used to ask a simple question to my parents. Would you like your daughters, your children, be like her? You want your students, your kids to be doing the same thing that you're doing now. Choice is yours. And that was the thing that clicked in their mind and they made that decision. It was very clear that I'm supporting my daughter to shape her future and make her life much better. So this is how I changed the mindsets.
Thank you. So personal experience on behalf of parents. I think we might have just lost Lamia, but I'll go to Oluwadamilola. How have you managed to change mindsets?
Are you there? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Awesome. So for me, In my community, because I grew up on a farmers community, both my parents are farmers, the reality is that once you finish secondary school, that is, if you're lucky to finish secondary school, you're expected to be married off or to just find somebody to marry you. So, however, my parents, even though they did not have, formal education, they've seen how it can be useful. So my parents really supported education. So 5, 6 years ago, when I got into social impact, I had to use myself as the standard, as the blueprint of something that is positive, something that education can do for a person. And it means that I have a responsibility to be excellent because I'm trying to sell a story, my story, to parents in community. Because when I go there with social impact project ideas, they won't buy into it if they don't see me as the positive replica of what I'm trying to sell it to them. So one of my earliest projects was on girls' education, and then I was in my second year of undergrad law. So I went with my colleagues from class. We were like 7, all girls. And we went to those communities and we told them, look at all of us. In few years, we are going to be lawyers. We will be in powerful positions. And all of us come from these kinds of communities. So education or a better life is not something kept only for the rich and the powerful. So by using ourselves as an example, it gave the parents something to see, and it created a picture of hope in their minds, and that went a long way because the project we had, we designed for them to partake in. Instead of convincing them over and over again, they were the ones signing up like voluntarily, and it changed everything. So for me, this is how I, changed mindsets, using myself as an example, and realizing that I have a responsibility to be the blueprint of the good life for girls in rural communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So working with parents, changing their mindset, changing mindsets through personal experience. Lamia, over to you. You have been working with government. How do you change their mindsets?
So if I'm being very honest, when we look at, institutions as big as governments, we're looking at systemic sort of structures that, are in place for such a long time that a lot of implicit, biases, a lot of sort of ways of just doing things, of ways of just governing, is so entrenched in like our communities that it becomes really difficult to make any sort of change. um a lot of it also just becomes, people in positions of power to, they're like, okay, we are listening and we're hearing, but then after that there's rarely any follow up. And that's not just within governments, but even when you're working with larger UN structures of trying to understand, trying to increase girls' education, outreach, or whether it's different initiatives. I've always seen a lot of bureaucratic pushback in terms of what does that change look like. So the work that I did with the government of Pakistan was proposing a policy to help increase access to education for minority girls in Pakistan, including transgender girls in Pakistan who have historically been disadvantaged in the community. So when you're thinking of changing those mindsets, I think one voice is never enough. There needs to be a lot of public pressure, and there needs to be public momentum. And if you think of it in terms of the country that I come from, it's very slow, which sometimes can feel really frustrating because there's an urgent need for this action. It's not like we can wait on it. We cannot, because every time we wait on taking action, we are also losing time that could be spent on educating someone and could literally be spent changing the world. So what I have realized is that governments especially are one of the, like, a lot of the times also we come from countries where there isn't enough money to to create an infrastructure for those sort of initiatives. When you look at Pakistan with the floods that have recently taken place, you know, education is put on the back burner only because there's a lot of other more pressing needs right now. For example, making sure people are housed. And the thing is, when students start going back to school, we know that boys are going to be given the preference first. You know, after the floods, when the schools are some sort of reconstructed, boys are going to be given the preference to return back to school. So I think putting that pressure on making sure that governments and agencies are rightly making sure that everyone is getting that re-access to school once things go back to normal, which we don't know when that will be. But yeah, there's a lot of pushback, and I think it's just about being resilient and continue fighting the cause.
Yeah, so resilience is something that I think Maggie knows about. And Maggie, another group of stakeholders who we haven't really mentioned is teachers. What about changing their mindsets?
Yeah, I think we really need to see teachers as sort of the bottlenecks in education systems, and we can really think about training teachers, professional development for teachers to help cultivate new mindsets. I mean, teachers were, for the most part, probably students or learners for, let's say, 12 years in systems that might have been conservative, narrow, full of gender bias, patriarchy, full of misogyny, all sorts of things. And then they go through potentially a 2 to 4 year, post-secondary program. And now they're again re-entering a system that they were quite used to as students. In that training that they went through, was it actually transformative? How much did they talk about gender? How much did they talk about unlearning or relearning? What was the feminist lens or frameworks that were brought into that teacher certification program or through ongoing professional development? You know, when I think of like the top graduate schools in education across the world, which one is shouting out at me right now saying, wow, we're known for our feminist teaching pedagogy, for example, right? I don't really know if there's a landmark one, okay? I might know one for STEM. I might know one for arts and creativity. I'm just putting that out there to sort of provoke. But I think we really need to invest in teachers so much in unlearning and relearning and helping them develop, a gender lens or a feminist lens. And that would be such a wonderful investment. In terms of what I did, I was lucky. I studied a master's. I was able to have a lived experience of being a female, but also went to progressive universities where they taught me about gender and feminist, studies and et cetera, and had lots of time to sort of dive deep into this research. So then when I went into the classroom, I took that and I started to have that lens on me. When I would talk to my students and listen to them, I would understand, okay, there's structural issues going on here. It would be very, when I was worried about why am I not having any girls come to my, life skills alternative program, right? Where it was designed specifically for kids who had dropped out, et cetera, to help bring them back into the school system. And I'd have 15 boys and just one girl. And so I had to take time, build relationships with girls, get them to feel comfortable to start talking to me, telling me about the issues, making visible to me what was so visible to them, as an issue of why they weren't feeling comfortable in that class. And in that context, it turned out that we needed to create an all-girls space because the girls just didn't feel comfortable in a co-ed space. And I could refer to, some of the previous panelists who opened up this conference talking about school violence, bullying, gender-based violence, et cetera, in classrooms. And that's going to come up sometimes in co-ed spaces, and we simply don't name it or talk about it enough. So in my context, what worked for me is I created a girls-only class, and all of a sudden, we increased enrollment by like 500%, right? So it's about definitely, I think, training teachers to have a feminist or gender lens and then letting them practice that, and also acknowledging that it's really tough. The system always isn't working for you. I'm coming in as a new teacher having to advocate for these changes. They're not coming down from the top. I'm having to change the system above me, right? So acknowledge the work that the teachers are doing to try to make these transformations. It's not easy.
Yeah, and it's something I actually want to come back to in my next question and to dig a little deeper on, because all of you have mentioned, working alongside people, really understanding the context, listening to people. And so I want to just go into this in a bit more detail and think about co-creation and ask you sort of how important is co-creation with these different stakeholders when you're thinking about how to address girls' education issues, specifically in your context. And who do you co-create with? You've mentioned a few. In particular, what roles can the government and teachers and parents and others play? I'd like to come back to you, Lamia, with your example about the government and changing policy. How important is co-creation for you, and how do you do it?
I think in countries where governments have a lot of sway over the mindsets of people, governments play an extremely important role in when it comes to co-creation, and co-creating spaces which are accessible for all, so inclusive for all identities, but also co-creating curriculums that are that look at gender as an important aspect. A lot of the times, I can obviously just speak in regards of Pakistan, gender is not put in any lens at all. In fact, there is very little emphasis. Even if there is emphasis, it sort of reinstates very subtly the role of a woman. Like recently, there was some, pushback on one of the government textbooks that it was simply just the front cover of the textbook, but it had the father and the son sitting on the couch, and the mother teaching the daughter how to color, but on the ground, which is very implicit. It's not explicitly stated that this is how it is, but if you look at how these sort of feed into mindsets, they play a huge role. So co-creating with the government to come up with a strategy that would help increase the amount of girls that believe that education is a right that they do have. And also co-creating with parents. Governments play a really big role in ensuring that parents feel safe enough to send their children to school. Parents feel, especially in a lot of conservative backgrounds, parents should feel that their daughter is able to receive an education that wouldn't sort of threaten them, because at this point just getting them an education is what's really important, and governments play a huge role in creating the infrastructure for it, but also creating the encouragement and the mindset for it. I think in that terms, a lot of governments have a really far way to go, because there's so much that needs to be done about that. But co-creation with government, I think, is one of the most important aspects of increasing girls' education.
Thank you. And on the same question, I'd like to come back to Maggie. You've talked a bit about teachers, but I know that you co-create a lot with students, and I'd love to know a bit about the advantages that you find in doing that.
Well, I mean, I worked in a unique context in the Canadian Arctic. I worked with Indigenous students who were Inuit, and they faced an incredibly high dropout rate. It was over 90 to 95%. And this is due to the legacies of colonization, intergenerational trauma, residential school, genocide, all sorts of very complicated intergenerational traumas that my students were carrying. And I think the only way forward was to really listen to them and then teach with them, co-create with them, find out how I could make school relevant to their reality, right? So in my context, it was dealing a lot with, let's say, socio-emotional regulation. I was working in a suicide crisis. We faced some of the highest suicide rates in the world. It was common for us to lose a student, one student a month to suicide. So it was very grave. It was very in our face. And as such, we had to pivot, as a school to address what these kids were going through and to give them content, that was helping these female, male students in their real and everyday lives. And that can, I know I'm talking kind of big language here, but that can look like, in my case, a running club. Recreational activities, cooking program, starting a coffee shop, a catering club with kids, etc. We started a running program, which ended up transforming these kids who were pack-a-day smokers into half marathon runners who would fundraise all year and travel from the Arctic to Hawaii and run a half marathon, and along the way say that it helped them develop skills to help them emotionally regulate all the trauma that they were living through. You know what I mean? And I think that's so important, especially when you take a gender lens to these issues. We know so often the female body, as soon as it hits adolescence and even before, is so subject to the sexual gaze and is so sexualized. And I think that sport and physical activity is a really powerful tool for girls to sort of reclaim their bodies and construct new identities, ones that are strong, healthy, and fit, and that they can see their body as a place to help them regulate all that they're going through, just as an example. But I think the magic for a teacher, in my context, is when you're co-creating both with your students, and in my context, co-creating with my community. So that might be, as mentioned with by the previous speaker, Lamia, for example, parents, but as well, sometimes your municipality, your mayors, your community councils are very accessible at a teacher level. Me trying to reach my prime minister, that's kind of tough when I've got a heck of a classroom to manage as well. But sometimes I could reach out to the mayor, the elected officials, etc. And when I could also have their support, our projects just flourished, right? So I think it's just wonderful when you can co-create, because as I say, when you run by yourself, you run fast, but when you run with others, you can run so far. And it just creates such sustainability to the projects that you're doing.
Yeah, I think this idea of running with other people is strong, and from the conversations I've had with the rest of you in this group. And Vanessa, we've heard a little bit about intergenerational trauma and how, you know, parents quite often carry some idea of what education should be like, what girls' education should be like, what school should be like for girls. Can you tell me a bit more about how you co-create with parents? Because that's been, I think, a big success of yours.
Yeah, you're right. And I'm, you know, listening to the different experiences of Maggie and Lamia, you know, teaching the education system, when it becomes so much successful, when these key stakeholders like teachers, parents, and students, when these three key pillars work together, they co-create, then the better results can be achieved. So in my context, as I told you, the scenario was like parents were not believing in education, and it reflects the students as well, so they were not enjoying it. So when I went there and I saw that parents are not believing in it, so I set up the three targets before me. The first was to change the parents' indifference towards education. That was the first, like I work a lot on it. And then second was ensuring every girl child is attending a classrooms. So while co-creating the spaces for girls, the first thing was to build up a relationship with parents. So instead of just, you know, just talking, doing some lectures or the things, I involve parents in my teaching learning process. Let me just give you an example. I set up an alarm on school's building, and it goes ring at 7 p.m. every night. So this was an indication for parents. Now stop working whatever you're doing. Now sit together with your kids and help them to do their homework, ask them what they did in a classroom, something like this. But as these parents were not, you know, aware of this, they don't know how to, they didn't know what to do. So in the middle, in the afternoon at 2 p.m. I used to send them text messages. This is what you are expected to do at night. So parent gets to know, oh, this is my duty. This is my responsibility at night. So this is how I created learning space at home as well. Learning doesn't happen in classrooms only. Teachers, students, and parents. This is how the co-creation means to me. And still, after like in last 13 years, this is still going on. So to me, like co-creation, it just or the better results cannot be achieved just by efforts of a single man. It's a collective efforts. And while working with governments, working with those parents, working with teachers, so all these are actually co-creating some new spaces for themselves. So to me, while we are working mostly with our students, at the same time, if we focus more on parents, then I think the girls' education or the girls might be getting better opportunities for themselves. Just like take example of one of the panelists. Look at her parents' approach towards her education. They didn't want their girl to get married at 16 or 14. So that's where when parents are educated, they are more aware of it. Then girls, achieve their dreams.
Yes, and so back to Oluwadamilola, because you've also been working a lot with parents and the government, so similar to Ranjit and to Lamia. What's it been like in your context, the process of co-creation?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. So the project with us that I planned with my team, the idea was because we saw a channel between poverty and students going out of school. So Nigeria right now, according to UNICEF, is in the top 5 of countries with the highest rate of out of school children. That is over 20 million. And a larger percentage of this number are girls. So we had an idea that we wanted to get these kids off the streets, how they do child labor during school hours. I think that wasn't good enough. But then during the project implementation, we realized that the problem is not just, lack of love for education or no, not because they didn't want education, but because of poverty. Why? We had partnerships with some schools to take some of the students on scholarship. But then the parents will go back to withdraw those kids from school so that those kids can sell, farm produce and goods and help in raising money for the family. So we saw that the problem was poverty. If we can find a way to empower the parents, to make the parents financially strong, then they will no longer need the children for child labor. And by the way, child labor is a crime in Nigeria, but sometimes there are laws, but there are no implementation mechanisms. So the project was that we got parents, mostly mothers, because they were the ones that showed more interest, and we got them to sign up for free skill acquisition classes, which was on sewing and sustainable fashion. So we got professionals who volunteered as trainers. They trained the parents, and then we raised money to support each parent who signed up for the training with funding to start up their business. So we placed the project on a 3-month monitoring and evaluation to measure the before and after, to see the amount of financial empowerment the family had and how it's translated to them being able to ensure that their children stays in school. So instead of pulling that child out of school when the child have no resources to buy textbook or to pay for lunch money or to buy pen or all that necessary materials in school, now the parents were empowered. They have money now, and instead of pulling their kids out of school, rather they were able to pay for those little expenses that are necessary for their children. And this for me is co-creation, because as social workers, if you're creating an idea or a project, you have a perfect idea in your head, but the idea may not be functional. It may not be usable in the particular community. So there is a necessity to ensure that you involve the proposed target audience in your creation process. If not, your idea will become useless. It will not be implementable, and then it defeats the essence of the whole thing. So we had, and how we got to the communities, that we partnered with local communities. So in Nigeria, we have this thing called the Market Women's Square. We call them Iyaloja. That's a Yoruba word for women of the market. So they are like leaders in the communities, and they gave us like access to our target audience, young women who are mothers, who still have the strength to work, but did not have a source of income generation. So we tackled the problem from the root, which was poverty, and the impact was tremendous. In fact, some of the students are currently my juniors. I'm in my final years, and some of the students who benefited are in their first year. So when I go to classes and I see them, it gives me so much pride. This is a project that began as far back as 2017, and we're still we do batches every year to keep up. So creation is very, very important in social impact projects, so that the savior complex of social impact workers does not overrule the impact that is supposed to be. So you don't come like a savior, whereas the people that are supposed to benefit are not benefiting. And by co-creating, we've seen tremendous success in our project, even scaling from one community to the other. We've gone to like 7 communities, and it's been amazing.
Yeah, thank you. There's a tiny bit of feedback from your mic, but I'd like to stick with you for the next question, if it's okay. We talked about poverty being a big problem, but also many of you work in contexts where violence and safety are issues that girls face. We've talked about this a little bit, but it's important, I think, from our previous conversations, I understand that responses need to be trauma-informed and focus on wellness. So could you tell us a bit more about what this means for your work? Oluwadamilala, I'll stick with you.
Thank you so much. So I have a personal experience with violence in campus. In 2018, I was attacked on my campus with a machete. And as a law student, you have all the theoretical knowledge of laws in your head, but then it dawns on you that implementation is almost, non-visible, is a mirage. Because I remember then in 2018, I tried to report, and to my greatest shock, I realized that for the first time, crimes, gender-based crimes committed on campuses were classified as a misdemeanor, not even a crime worthy of, being tried in the courts and everything. And it just showed to me the first time the realities of gender-based violence. There's a difference between having head knowledge and being a victim of a phenomena. And head knowledge is not enough. Anybody can have head knowledge, but it doesn't mean that you have to be a victim for you to understand the dynamics of this issue. So one of the things my team did was we started creating like groups in clusters across campuses. Young students who had gone through, gender-based violence on campus, coming together to have conversations and to demystify the harshness around these things. People don't want to talk about rape on campus, and then the victim blaming that also affects, victims, not only young women, even men, because victim does not have violence is not particular to a gender, even though women take a larger percentage of the victim spectrum. So we created a project and we started engaging leaders in the school, management, some of the high officials in the management, and then we partnered with the arts department, because we know that art and creativity is a powerful tool for storytelling to get information. We wrote a script and it was reenacted to show the realities of young women as to violence in campus and how this contributes to the reduction in the rate of young women, girls being enrolled in school. And luckily, should I say gratefully, that one action set in motion a review process of a 20-year-old law, the Student School Code of Conduct, and now rape, sexual assault is a crime. And then there is a panel set forth in my school where if you report, the case will be handed over to the police and officially taken up. Now, violence on campuses or violence in school areas has been one of the major factors that ensured young girls do not enroll in school. And sometimes I do not blame the parents, because we live in a very cultured society. And knowing that their children or their girls are exposed to danger, they tend to withdraw them. In their own minds, that is a way to keep them safe. But on the long run, it translates to inequality, because education is a tool to empower someone's life. And when that education is taken away, the young girl grows up into a woman with no backing, with no support, with no stability on her own in our society. So as a person, I am with my team, creating avenues to demystify those conversations, because we still have a society that thrives on victim blaming. And so, because I remember my own experiences when I reported, I was faced with, oh, why were you walking alone? What were you wearing? Where were you going? And all those very questions that sound, they sound very innocent, but they're very dangerous because they silence people from, speaking out, and perpetrators thrive in those silence. So by creating safe spaces for conversation, we have successfully bridged that gap. At least it made my school a bit safer, and with the support of partnerships with major organizations in Nigeria, we're looking to expand to other schools. I am a grassroots worker, maybe because I grew up in a very rural community. I build from ground up. If we try a project in the community and it's successful, then there is a possibility of replication on a larger scale. And this is what we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that very personal experience with us. I know that sharing is not easy, and I'm really sorry that that's something that you've experienced. I know, Maggie, that this is something also that your students have experienced, many of them, and it would be great if you could tell us a little bit about how you address this and what it means for your work.
Yeah, there's sort of two stories that are coming to mind. I guess one, just to give people an idea of like the very real challenge that it is to sometimes talk about these issues in school. Again, I worked in a context where there was a lot of gender-based violence. There was also a lot of sexual-based violence, and many of our young students were at risk of or had survived sexual assault. And we had an incredible elder in our community, a female elder who herself had survived being molested as a child and had gone through a lot of that trauma, and it manifested in all sorts of harmful ways in her life. And then she got to a place of what she would describe as healing, and she had, let's say, healed herself. And then she was an incredible counselor, support, voice, champion, comforter for other people who were, and protector for other people who were at risk or who had also survived a sexual assault. And she was very passionate about helping kids at the school know about what sexual assault is, know how to protect themselves, know how to bring voice to those issues. And she ran a program called Good Touch, Bad Touch, which was a very sort of child-friendly program to help talk about these issues with young kids. So here she is, a respected elder in our community, like a grandma to many kids, a great grandmother, a grandaunt, a mother, very well revered. And yet when she would schedule to come to our school to do her presentations, which were obviously so valued and so contextual, we're now bringing into the school not just curriculum about, how the Egyptian pyramids were built. We're talking about real things that the kids really need to learn right now. And we would often get death threats at the school. We would get calls in about somebody who was going to bring a gun to the school if this elder came and spoke, et cetera, et cetera. So I just share that story to show how complicated it can be, how sensitive, how much of a threat it still is, even sometimes for elders, for leaders to bring voice, to these issues within a school setting, and how much as a school, we need to navigate these spaces. So I just share that. But what I also want to share, I guess, in my teacher lens, is that when I think about neuroscience, I know from neuroscience or brain development studies that when a child or an adult is not safe I say that their brain is like, it's like frozen, you know, the executive functioning part of the brain that we use for reasoning and, you know, learning language and vocabulary and like logic and recognizing patterns, all that, it's frozen. It's either in, you know, fight, flight, or freeze. Just like if you've suddenly been, you know, attacked in a situation or pickpocketed, in that moment, you might fight, flight, or freeze, right? If you're unsafe, your brain goes into that lockdown. It tries to keep you safe. It's not really interested in learning about Egyptian pyramids at that moment, right? And yet so many of our female students walk into schools that are not safe, right? Might not always be very visible to some people because we don't have our gender or feminist glasses on, but it is visible to them whether they have the language or not to express it. And their brains are not always open, right, to all the learning that we're trying to give them. So even though those girls may now be in that classroom, I always encourage people to think about whether that space right now, whether that teacher can hold that space that is welcoming, you know, safe, full of love and full of encouragement, so that female student can really open her brain, you know, take it out of fight, flight, fright, you know, open it up so that she can absorb all that there is to learn at that school. And I think the key to that, and research will say to that, the key to that is having a positive, strong relationship with a teacher. And from a system level, I really think we need to give teachers more time during their professional day to really build these positive and safe relationships with all students, girl students, but across the board, of course, to create these positive and safe spaces for them, because they can physically be in the class, but if they're worried about bullying, gender harassment, what's going to happen at recess, after school, if there's an ex-boyfriend in that class with them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, a perpetrator of violence, et cetera, if there's somebody else on campus that they're worried about, you know, that's affecting their brain at that point. And so we really need to create welcoming and safe spaces.
We do, and it's something that I want to ask Lamia to comment on. This idea of female students walking into schools that are not safe, as you say, and the threat of threats. Lamia, we're nearly out of time, but I know that you've said to me that, you know, minority girls in Pakistan face opposition to their education, are in constant danger. Could you, just for 1 minute, because we're almost out of time, tell us a little bit about how you work with that?
Very quickly, just to so one of the main, you know, sort of inequality spaces for transgender girls in Pakistan, and in 2018, I believe, there was like sweeping legislation that was passed that would, you know, help protect the rights of transgender women, etc. But recently there has been speculation that those legislations will be pushed back or pulled back, which shows that, you know, there's still opposition being faced, and there's quite literally, you know, safety is at huge risk. The way that solutions have been trying to be found is by creating all transgender girls schools and try to create a space that is inclusive, but and that feels safe. But even then, there's so much that needs to be done. So I think creating inclusive spaces that would be that would only include them would be a good first step before completely, you know, doing co-ed schools.
Thank you. And we are out of time, and I know there's some closing remarks, but I would like to ask each of you on this topic to give me your 20-second closing idea that you would like our audience to go away with. Ranjit, in 20 seconds from you, what should we be thinking?
Yeah, I'll not take much time. So ensure girls have equal access to technology and resources. They need to learn effectively, and ensure safe spaces, empowering spaces for learning, including online or offline learning. So I think we need to build those, you know, digital skills through the gender-based, gender-bias-free teaching learning process. And everyone, like teachers, communities, government, should work together so that we could ensure that every girl is learning.
Thank you. Oluwademilola, 20 seconds from you, final thoughts.
Thank you so much, Leonora. So for me, gender equality is not an abstract term. So when we're talking about empowering women and girls, we should always see it on a broad perspective, not just getting young girls to school. How do we empower their parents so that they can be, strong, confident members of the society who are involved in the decision making of that society? Because the truth is, if we're just looking at getting girls into school and we're not talking about equality in legislation making, equality in leadership, then we're just, it's like cutting one head of a hydra. It will grow back and it will grow double. So our solution should be intersectional and our solution should be inclusive. Thank you.
Intersectional and inclusive. Thank you. Lamia, what do you think?
I just want to add on too, because this is what I was going to say, that I think solutions need to be intersectional. It is also understanding that within the spectrum of, women identifying folks that we were talking about, there are certain intersections of identity that do make it more difficult for particular individuals. And I think that is something that goes under the radar really often. A lot of the times when governments are reporting their statistics of, wow, we got girls into schools, they do not talk about the fact that what was their focus on girls that come from minority backgrounds or that come from marginalized communities. So we need to look at not using an umbrella term when we're talking about girls' education and focusing on, the intersectional identities that go along with being a girl and how those need to be more inclusive in our reporting as well, and in terms of our government planning as well.
Thank you. And Maggie, final words.
Teachers matter. They're so important to the education system. And I hope, my wish would be that every teacher, to draw upon a keyword that just came out of this last little wrap up, could see themselves, as an intersectional feminist and bring that lens into their classroom. I think we would be well on our way to building a beautiful place. So teachers matter. Don't forget teacher training, professional development, keep at it. They're so important. And they're the bottleneck to the future.
Thank you. We have really whistled through an awful lot in 45 minutes, and I'm so grateful to all of these roundtable members. I'm sure that the organisers will be able to share ways of getting in touch with them if you have more questions. But I would like to introduce Konstantinos Doukas, who is the President and Trustee of School of the Future International Academy, who will be delivering the closing remarks of this event. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Eleonora, and I really appreciate the last 20 seconds elevator pitch for your whole, group discussion. I think it was very clever and very good what you did. Great job, and teachers matter. I totally agree. Teachers matter, especially we should never stop giving opportunities for professional development for teachers, because that's where everything starts from. So hi to you all. It's always a pleasure to do the closing remarks, but it's always very difficult to make a presentation after students, and students' voice so powerful, so clear, so true. So my job is becoming a bit more difficult to try to narrow down in this great summit and all these nice comments and presentations that we heard. I will try to make this summary as more powerful and effective as possible. I will go now to share my screen. Do you see my screen? Message from the team. Great. So when we started doing the Bridge the Gap, and it was the idea that came up in 2019, and we started in 2020, we could never imagine how strong and the big demand for participation and these excellent people who are supporting our scope and our effort. So we're very proud of that. And but on the other hand, we're very sorry and sad because this year we don't have with us one of our co-founders, a person that supported the Bridge the Gap, a person that he gave his whole heart to Sophia. And his name is Dino Kiritsis. And he was one of our best colleagues in the team, which unfortunately we lost a couple of months ago. So we decided to do Bridge the Gap 2022 in his memory. And I'm sure that his heart is still with us. And I hope that his vision and his internal strength will always be with us in order to continue the vision of Sophia. I will start from the plenary sessions and the main presentations. First, we define the problem, where Pauline Rose made a great presentation. She talked about the sustainable development of goals that include educational targets, both for girls and boys, through lifelong learning and inclusivity, diversity, and gender equality. And she also showed us a very nice diagram and a very nice picture that I kept like this for your future reference, because I believe that the examples that you can read in there very easily present what the barriers are and what on the girls that they face globally. So we do have gender parity that improving, and we need to go beyond the basic numbers, Pauline said, and we should check more the qualitative attributes. Especially for girls, you know, that we do have a more risk on gender-based violence. And we know that especially for young women is more likely to face discriminations in their work opportunities. At her closing remark, Pauline gave us a very positive point of view, because she said that we do see quality, you know, there's been a lot of work done, and we see making this reality, you know, of progress. So that was a really positive remark, and I hope that also Bridge the Gap 2022 is putting a little piece on this progress in girls' education. Then we had the pleasure of listening to Antara giving us her remarks on tackling gender stereotypes. It's really amazing. In 1916, women should not vote, and in 1950, on a very progressive US universities, women could not study, or should not study sciences. So let's put more effort on how we can use education in tackling gender stereotypes. She also said about how much gender stereotypes affect kids' development and psychology, and also affects their behavior in their adult lives. It's something that they carry with them in their adult lives. And she closed by saying that it's very useful if we try to put students on identifying the reality of gender's roles, and how important is the mother, how important is the father, the difference of the roles, and their impact in society. Then we had Susanna Hayes talking about school violence and giving us very important data. But she mentioned that we still need to collect more quality data on school violence. It's essential if we are to understand the prevalence of school violence. She also mentioned that we do still have in many countries around the world unacceptable ways of punishment. And that's a mistake, because that's keep on going the same problem. We need to keep kids in school and feed them. So financial barriers prevent many children, especially girls, from attending school, because their parents will choose them to work or to get married and get out of the house and don't create any more financial barriers and financial burden. And she also mentioned that we need to generate better evidence on what works to eliminate violence. So if we have these great best practices and we can prove how to eliminate violence, this will be very helpful. And we need to get the education sector to care more. So we need to ring the bell, shout out loud, and put the education sector to care more about preventing violence in schools. And then we had Alexa presenting an amazing presentation about things that we think we know, but we realize when we see the numbers. And in a world where computer science needs to become more diverse. We only have 18% of women taking computer science degrees at undergraduate, both in the United States and Europe. And in times where technical skills are more important than ever, and students want to jumpstart their lives, their careers with hands-on experiences and make their resume stand out within demand, there's a great computer science curriculum challenge because many countries around the world don't have a computer science curriculum. And we do need to have students developing computational thinking. It's compulsory. It's needed for boys and girls for their future employment and life and business lives. So, as Alexa said, new challenges create possibilities for skilled graduates, and the rapidly changing tech landscape opens doors for student applicable certifications. So what we see now is that certificates are becoming more important and are challenging the traditional diploma path. So we need, as educators, to help our students get their certificates and stand out to the job market. So we need to use all these tools that are out there in order for our students to get their certificates and get very useful soft skills. And then we moved over to this amazing roundtable with teachers and students, where we heard that in many areas around the world, girls do not have equal access to education and are deprivileged in comparison with boys. There are many reasons that this happens: early marriage, stereotypes of women's future roles, the vision of household labor, safety in school, going back and forth to school. Girls are more afraid if the school is not safe or the path to the school is not safe. And she also, the whole panel described how we know that if girls get the right education, it's likely less to marry young, and it's very possible to lead a healthy, productive life and higher income and participate in decisions that affects them and contribute to the whole society. The whole society is more stable and resilient if we have this kind of a balance on women's presence and women's voice. So how do we change the mindset of parents in the society in order to help bridge the gap in girls' education? Three ideas that we got is that we have to use role examples of successful educated girls. We can also use our strong voice, all of us, but we also need governmental initiatives. We need the government to support these initiatives or create new ones in order to bridge the gap. And of course, we need trained teachers who will always have continuous self-development and involvement on helping bridge the gap in girls' education. Co-creation, extremely useful. We heard that if you go alone, you go faster. If we go together, we go further. So let's go together. Teachers, principals, families, government. We can all support the different kind of initiatives that are, or create new ones around the world in order to co-create ways of bridging the gap for girls' education. I like that very much that it was mentioned on the roundtable. Education is the most powerful tool to make the change and solve the gap on girls' education. That's true. That when we hear about and we listen about educated people, the gap in girls' education is much smaller. So we have to use this powerful tool in order to help this problem be solved. From Sophia's point of view, we do know that girls' rights education are human rights, and this highly involves also men in the effort to preserve them. And there is no doubt that due to collective effort and effective initiatives, we have globally made great progress. And we're happy for this progress, but there's still a lot more to do. We need to make sure that girls are not just graduating, but also get into the workforce. We have to be sure that girls worldwide have access to technology and have developed basic IT skills, because that's an accelerator for their work for the work and for the future. Support local education leaders in addressing and solving the problem, and put a lot of effort to develop fewer formal ways of education that can be exploited by girls. So if we have different ways and platforms and tools that girls can get educated, then the percentage of girls who are getting educated will become more, because it can be more easily addressed and used. Sophia's vision is that no student is left behind, that all children around the world, both girls and boys, have access to quality education and can achieve their goals and dreams. And that's why we make this World Summit. So we do believe that we should support girls' rights to equal and equality education, and we believe it's a major importance, not just for us in Sophia, but for many people around the world. So we should invest in that. And we, from Sophia, we set ourselves at the disposal of school leaders, policymakers, and initiatives worldwide to work together for providing girls equal opportunities and access to quality education. This is an open call for the global education community. Let's all join forces. Let's do it. Let's help girls around the world get educated and have a better life. I thank you all for participating in Bridge the Gap 2022 and contributing, making our schools a better place for our students. Thank you all.